Great delight to welcome you to this event co-sponsored by the Atlantic Council and by the Woodrow Wilson Center. I would like to take this opportunity to thank especially Peter and Jason for reaching out to us. It's wonderful to have more institutions in Washington that are focusing on Mexico. I've always said that actually a little bit of healthy competition is a very, very good thing. And I also think it's wonderful that we can collaborate on these events, and the door is always open for us to do this again. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to... Absolutely, absolutely. I'd also like to thank the embassy, particularly Ambassador Medina Mora, for his ongoing support and for always being so open and supportive of our efforts, always willing to give advice. Without further ado, I think I'd like to just say a few words about who we have here today, because that's really what you're waiting for. We're delighted to have with us the Honorable Debbie Wasserman Schultz, U.S. Representative and Chair of the Democratic National Committee. You have the biography in front of you on your on the sheets, so I'm not going to read out. Just going to say that very, very accomplished individual, long history of working in U.S. politics. We're delighted to have you here with us today. And to her right, the Honorable César Camacho, Chairman of the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party from Mexico. Again, has a long biography here and is very, very accomplished man. One thing I'd like to point out is that you've served at pretty much every level of government, I think, in Mexico, which gives you a unique perspective of Mexican federalism and the way that the party operates at all different levels, which is an intriguing aspect of the PRI and of Mexican political parties in general. It's a terrific time to be talking about political parties, and in particular the future of political parties. In Mexico, as some of you may have seen, political parties are seeing their core support shrink somewhat as less and less people join political parties and as people are less committed to one party over another. One of the incredible things about the process of democratization in Mexico is we've seen increased voter choice. People switching their votes between elections. And it's one of the phenomena that we've seen in particular since 1997. We've seen alternancia, the change in government, which is a very, very healthy sign for Mexican democracy. And as Mr. Camacho was saying yesterday at a private meeting, he said, one of the great signs that his party, the PRI, is in a healthy position is that for the first time in 2012, it won national government when it was in opposition. That's an extraordinary sign. Because, of course, through the hegemonic period, if we can use that term, of the PRI for 70 years, it won power while it was in power. This is a sign that it's a healthy party that is coming back and was able to really capture the attention and the support of the Mexican public. It's a great time for these two parties to be talking to each other as well. Two very, very different legislative agendas in each country and very, very different legislative records, of course, for these two legislatures. In Mexico, of course, we've seen the enormous success of the Pacto por México. We've seen the success of not just of the PRI, but of all three major political parties in working together over a period of 18 months. And one of the questions that I hope comes out today is whether that cooperation can continue, and if so, what are the conditions to allow that to continue? And many people over the last 18 months have said, what is it that the United States Congress can learn from the Mexican Congress in terms of bringing opposition parties together or opposing parties together? And it's very difficult to make that comparison. I mean, to compare apples and oranges in the strictest sense. Very, very different conditions, very different parties. But there are basic lessons about cooperation and collaboration between parties that I think we can learn from the experience in Mexico. Mexico has faced an extraordinary challenge since 2012, since July of 2012, which was the backlog of huge reforms which are needed. And we see a similar thing in the United States. Some very, very important reforms that need to be dealt with, including, of course, the issue of immigration. These are issues which both parties are beginning to come to a basic consensus on. And I'm fascinated, or I will be fascinated to hear what these two great experts have to say about this. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for being here. I will now turn the floor over to Peter.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you very much. Thank you both for joining us here at the Atlantic Council. I'm Peter Schechter. I'm the director of the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center here. When Ambassador Medina Mora and the embassy called to ask if we would welcome César Camacho to the Atlantic Council, we said to ourselves, what a great opportunity that this was to do exactly what the Wilson Center and what the Atlantic Council does best, which was try to create a bridge for an expanded conversation between our two countries. So we asked the chairwoman if she'd join us, and she gave us an enthusiastic yes. This will be a really interesting discussion. I know there are a number of reporters here, and we've arranged a press conference immediately after for Dr. Camacho. So I may call on a couple of the audience, and I'm going to hold the reporters' questions until afterwards, when Dr. Camacho will be delighted to have a private press conference with you. These are two great political parties with huge traditions, with great futures. And at first blush, a lot of Americans might say, well, there are way too many differences between these two political parties, between these two countries. And yes, there are differences, but it is amazing also how many similarities there are in both the challenges and opportunities. Both are the heads of ruling parties, both have sitting presidents, and it's a very different thing to have a sitting president than to be in the opposition. Both parties face pretty serious challenges. Your party just ended the Pacto por Mexico, and as Duncan said, we look forward to hearing what that means. You're facing a rough midterm election this November that is, I know, has you very, very busy and going around the country. And both parties live and breathe in a federal system with serious governors who are often popular and jealous of their independence. And finally, both parties have made inclusion of minorities and women a really, really fundamental banner in the last few years. So I want to start with inclusion. Dr. Camacho, the PRI has decided to really make inclusion a very big issue. And in some ways, even without the recent changes at the PRI, Mexico has something to teach the United States. Women equal about 35% of Mexico's Congress, and in contrast, women are a total of 18% of our Congress. Tell us a little bit about what the PRI and what Mexico has done recently in terms of including women and minorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for coming, for give us your patience and your attention. First of all, I would like to stress this affirmation that the PRI was born beneath the power 85 years ago. But although, as Duncan said, in 2012, we won the elections from the opposition. And I would like to precise that in 2006, we had the group, the smallest group in the Chamber of Representatives, the smallest in the whole history, 106 out of 500. Then many analysts, I don't know if bona fide or not, predicted that our party could disappear. But the surprise was not only that we were able to rise, but to win the elections from the opposition. Nowadays, we have 20 states from 32, and almost the majority in both chambers of the Congress of the Union. But the most important thing is that we are convinced that we are not a party of the 20th century. We are the party of the 21st century. What I mean is that we admit, we are convinced that in the 20th century we did a lot of things. Some, I think that most of them good for the country, and I must admit many of them not good for the country or not good only for the politicians. But I think that as in the lives of the persons in general, the most important is the possibilities that we can build, not only to wait seated. In this order of ideas, I would like to talk to you related to the Pacto por México. I think that first of all, what we need, what we the politicians need, first of all, is willing. We need, obviously, the knowledge about the specific issues. We need, and this I would like to underline, we need sense of responsibility. And last but not least, patriotism. And this last part is related not only to the party that I represent, but to the other parties. Nowadays, we have 7 parties, but 3 are those who are in the states and in most of the municipalities, and obviously in the Congress of the Union. The Pacto por México has been, per se, a good news. But the most important thing is to begin a very large or long path that we have been able, the 3 parties at least, we have been able to walk more or less together. And the results are very close to us. I'm sure that the figures are more eloquent than the arguments. Our Constitution has 136 articles. The number of articles that have been modified, 60. Then 44% of the Constitution, 21 new laws, and have had the amendments, 64 important laws. As you know, our legal system is different, or not exactly the same for the states. Are under works all the legislation related to telecom and to the energy reform, because we have taken the first step, that is the constitutional reform related to energy reforms, that are 3 articles that were considered for some people like a dogma. I think that the political parties must have principles and values, but not dogmas, because the dogmas are very close to religion. This is very important, but it isn't a religion. Then I am sure that in the next 5 weeks, or I expect surely with objective arguments, that we will be able to pass the next weeks, let's say to the end of June, the laws that are under works, as I told you. I think that the PRI has, first of all, I don't pretend to teach anything, because each country is different, the political culture is different. What I would like to do is to offer some ideas, to share arguments, to offer points of view. We, and this is very important from my point of view, we, the PRI, are not a political agency of the government. We intend to be the political agent of the society. We are not the party of the government. We are the party on the government, or in the government, ruling. This is not a condition of privilege. This is a very huge responsibility. Then I think that we are going to face, or we are just nowadays, a very, very important challenges. But we are not only willing to face them, but enthusiastically, we are ready to face and to build the consensus that are necessary not only for passing the laws, but to implement the reforms, to push specific actions, and the most important, to change the point of view of the citizens whose points of view are related to their pockets. What I mean is that if this group of reforms don't give to the people more opportunities, good chances, and increases their income, something is failing.
I'd love to
Sorry.
just take up the idea, because Dr. Camacho has brought up a bunch of the things that I want to talk about. The idea of the 21st century party and the whole issue of how to include. I've heard you say a lot that the Democratic Party needs to be a big tent. And so, you know, one of the questions I wanted, how do you go about doing that without actually having quotas or imposing certain numbers?
Well, we are a big tent. That's a goal that has been accomplished by the Democratic Party in the United States quite a long time ago. We are, in terms of our values, in terms of the priorities and the way that we structure our agenda and advance our goals, and even in the way we recruit candidates to run with the party, diversity and inclusion and empowerment has been at the top of our priority list. And you can very clearly see that in the results, in the diversity of the elected officials that affiliate with the Democratic Party at the local, state, and national level, particularly when compared to the opposing party, the Republicans, who clearly do not make diversity, inclusion, and empowerment a priority. They say that they do, but because they have really relied on policies that ultimately alienate groups that could make them more diverse, they have a harder time attracting diverse elected officials and leaders to in the same numbers that we do. There's a contrast, really, in every in every aspect of the political process. You mentioned that we're facing a rough midterm. That will remain to be seen, whether we face a rough midterm. I think the Republicans also potentially could face a rough midterm, given that they've not embraced the top priorities of the American people, which are focusing on creating jobs and continuing to get the economy turned around, and really are more focused on things that would distract from that fact. But your initial question on the status of political parties and people's more people registering as independents rather than affiliating with the party, or that affiliation occurring at a greater rate than affiliation with the party. We're focused as a national party. Obviously, we have the presidency and one chamber of Congress. As a result, that gives us the ability, through the president's power, to move things within his jurisdiction. And the president, rightfully so, because he's gotten no cooperation from the Republicans in Congress, and our system requires cooperation to move an agenda forward, the way our founding fathers developed the legislative process. The president has said this is going to be a year of action, and he's acted. He's made sure that we can focus on continuing to make the economic recovery more robust, focus on job creation, focus on educational opportunities, and ensuring that more young people have an opportunity to go to college and build a ladder into the middle class. But what has been particularly disturbing, and a cause of our not being able to get some things done, as perhaps Mexico has been able to focus on, is we have such polarization right now and such division between the parties, because we only have two, that and sadly, and I know it's going to come as a shock that this is the lens through which I look, but from my point of view, the problem with us not being able to work together is that the Republican Party has taken a hard turn to the right. they have allowed the Tea Party faction of their party to essentially get a stranglehold on them, and really focused more on my way or the highway politics, and dug in on some issues that make it tougher for us to work together. Whereas in previous years, even though, and I've been in office for 22 years, almost 10 years as a member of Congress, and I've never seen a legislative process as polarized as this one. And it makes it impossible for us to move on important issues like comprehensive immigration reform, particularly when it comes to the Mexicans that have migrated here, either through legal or who are undocumented. Making sure that we give them, that we recognize that undocumented immigrants are part of the backbone of our economy, that are simply here to make a better way of life for themselves. Both parties say that they believe that there should be a path to legal status and to citizenship. Only one party, the Democratic Party, is committed to actually moving that forward. The unfortunate thing is the other party has been an obstacle. And then on voting in particular, there is a very serious difference. Democrats have focused, and we've had a national focus through our voter expansion project, which is focused on not just protecting the right to vote, but getting more people registered if they're eligible, and making sure we can turn them out and ensure their vote is accurately counted. The Republicans actually have had leaders of theirs say out loud that they do better in an election when fewer people vote. And to just give you a sense of how they've put that idea into practice, in 2012, there were 180 restrictive bills put forward by Republican leaders in states across the country in 41 states. In 2013, 92 bills that restricted voting rights and access to the ballot in 33 states. We're focused as a party on giving more people the opportunity to cast a ballot. And if you think about it, going all the way back to the Founding Fathers, more than 1/3 of the amendments to the United States Constitution have had something to do with expanding voting rights. More than 1/3. I think if we had the Founding Fathers sitting in the audience today, and we asked them if they had what they thought about their initial pass-through on access to the ballot, they would probably not grade themselves as high as they would like, because they got some things wrong. And we've been focused, because we are so committed as a country, as a democracy, to access to the ballot and people expressing their right to vote and who should represent them in the Congress and across the country, that we've focused on expanding the right to vote, while unfortunately our counterparts seem hell-bent on constricting people's right to vote, because for some reason they think they do better when there are fewer, when the electorate is not as diverse.
Right. I wanted to get back to this because I think the Congresswoman has brought up, we are suffering in America a real moment of extreme polarization. And you have just given the world a real example of how political parties can come together. You've listed the number of changes in the laws that you've done in the last 16 months, and I think it's certainly a very, very impressive thing. Now, one of the political parties has pulled out of the pact, and so can you give us a sense of what you foresee for the future? I mean, will this list of legislative accomplishments be able to continue into the future?
First of all, it's important to underline that the sense of opportunity, the timing is very important to make decisions. Then I think that it was a very, very important decision that the Pacto por México could have been signed the second day of the term of President Peña, exactly December 2nd of 2012. Right. I think that this so-called democratic bonus is every day is losing a bit of this bonus. Then it's very important to begin with this kind of agreements. Now that virtually the Pacto por México has been concluded, because nobody has declared its death, what I have suggested is some like this: paper agreement, pay-per-view. Each agreement must be built, and if it's possible, go on. Then what I expect is that every day will be a little bit difficult to agree related to the most important topics because of the elections of middle term. We will go to elections in June of next year.
2015.
Yes, then, yes, 2015. And obviously the elections change the mood of the politicians. But I expect that we could be ready to pass some of these.
That this election in 2015 is the first election in which members of Congress can be re-elected.
No, not this time. This is, there was an agreement that the re-election begins or will be enforced from 18. Exactly, because with the argument that the legislators that have passed don't take advantage of this new decision.
Right.
But it's important to precise that we have adopted this historically difficult political institution that is the re-election. But I would like to say 3 words related to the new attitude, the new decisions of my party related to young people and women. We have a lot of women in the Congress, but we need much more women. That's the reason why President Peña has suggested, has sent an initiative to the Congress that has been adopted, has been passed, that in the next election, just that of 15, will be 50% of candidates women. And obviously, a lot of youngsters. And if someone is a woman and young, I think that has the candidate in the pocket. But it's very important to precise that we have decided to teach very, very well taught to the new people of our party. By the way, nowadays, there are simultaneously 2 groups from all over the country in balance 10 by every state, that online and every month, every one weekend per month, they go to Mexico City, and the teachers are not only specialists, but the ministers of the President Peña cabinet. What we are decided to is to teach, to form a kind of a new generation of priistas that could be in better conditions, not only to represent in formal terms, but with efficiency, with the best tools that are obviously the knowledge about economy, law, commerce, migration, because we are absolutely convinced that we must adopt this kind of affirmative actions, because we need to admit that historically, culturally, the women don't have the same opportunities if we let them, let's say, free, or that to follow their luck. I think that many of them won't have luck. Then we have to push in a certain way
for
this
affirmative
measure.
action, right? Right. I was just going to say, you know, in our country, Congress has a, what is it, Congressman, 90% reelection
more than
incumbents?
that, actually.
More than that.
96.
So perhaps you can give us some tips about how I mean it. I mean the whole issue of constituent services and things like that. About how do incumbents keep getting reelected in our Congress?
You know, the dynamic that exists, which has been persistent throughout at least modern political history, is that even when the American public detests Congress, they like their own member of Congress. And the re-election rate has essentially remained relatively high because we have single-member districts where you're representing, you know, one defined area with a particular population. Generally, you're from that area. You spend a lot of time as a member in front of community groups and the constituent service. Woe to the member of Congress or elected official that develops a reputation for ignoring the needs of their constituents or being considered non-responsive. So for us, we have, you know, district offices in which we have staff who will help constituents cut through red tape that you know, amazingly gets in the way sometimes of Americans being able to interact with their government and get the things done that will ensure that their life can proceed. And so that's a role that members of Congress and our staff often play, is trying to help cut through that red tape. And
He'll be right back.
sure, and make sure that we can help them maneuver through the challenges of dealing with a very large bureaucracy sometimes. I want to go back for a moment, though, to the issue of cooperation, because, you know, what I have said for all the time that I've been the chair of the party is that it's really so important that we try to set aside the my way or the highway politics. Focusing on principle and the principles around which your party is organized is important. But everything isn't principle. And that's wisdom that I've had to learn through all the years I've been a legislator. And it was advice I got right when I was first elected 22 years ago. Sometimes a question comes down on your preference. You know, we all have to make decisions to go against our preference in order to achieve a greater goal and come together. So you make compromises on your preferences. You never sacrifice or compromise principle. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have enough people on the other side of the aisle, from our point of view, that are willing to come together and forge common ground. We could get to some common goals, but the other issue, Peter, is that almost every election cycle, when the numbers are this close, I mean, we have to pick up 17 seats to win the majority. When I was first elected to Congress 10 years ago, we had to pick up 15 seats to win the majority. When the numbers are this close, the stakes are very high. So compromise, too much compromise, and I think, unfortunately, given the appearance that the other party has actually made progress and potentially reinforced their likelihood of success, is something that you know, perhaps political leaders don't have an interest in seeing happen. And by the way, I want to acknowledge the ambassador and thank you very much for your service and, you know, your country's really incredible relationship. I have traveled to Mexico on an official congressional delegation trip, been to Mexico City, and I have, you know, many Mexican-American constituents, and I want to thank Ambassador Marshall also for asking me to participate, and thank you, Peter, as well.
Pleasure. Let me just ask you quickly, because I know this is one thing that Mexico has in the recent electoral reform, the issue of campaign finance. I know that this has been a tough issue for those of us who think that there has to be some type of control in the money pouring into campaigns. How do you see that issue progressing here in the States? I mean, Mexico has done a lot in the last couple of years.
Well, we've gone backwards, unfortunately. I mean, we had very strong campaign finance laws with a lot of transparency, a lot of accountability, and limits that most people thought were reasonable. Again, I hate to keep going back to the cleavage between the two parties, but suits brought by the Republican Party have resulted in Supreme Court cases, the most recent one being the McCutcheon decision, tossing out limits and adding to both the opaqueness of the campaign finance system, where you have unlimited resources that are able to be dumped into campaigns with no transparency and no accountability, and a big question mark at the end of an election hanging over to whom the new elected official is beholden to as a result of all those resources. I mean, how, if a newly elected official knows that the resources that were contributed on their behalf or directly to them, with no way to trace that or know where it came from, how is that elected official not going to feel like they are only answerable to their constituents? It's just human nature to when you have that big an influence. And that's why we put a governor on it. We limited that campaign finance, we created campaign finance restrictions, which our party believes we need to add to, so that you can decrease the influence of big money and increase the influence of the smaller donations and a grassroots focus. We're a bottom-up party. I mean, we're a party that prides ourselves on our average contribution, particularly during President Obama's campaign, being about $54. And the 98% of President Obama's contributions to his re-election campaign in 2012 were under $250. This between Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision and potentially future decisions, it's really upended our campaign finance system and really been damaging to our democracy.
There have been many changes in Mexico in campaign finance.
Yes, this is a very, very important challenge because we have a lot of defying situations. We have decided, and I am afraid that the people in general are not, or they don't like this financial system, because 90% of the resources that the parties manage come from the budget. Then they say the democracy is very expensive. But not only expensive, but because as in many parts of the world, politicians and political parties, we are not in our best moment. Then they say it's very expensive, but this measure that has been taken several years ago has avoided or has intended to avoid the dangerous and illegal support of the campaigns.
So you have they have public financing?
Yes,
okay.
90%.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Only 10% come from the pockets of the persons. But much more, we are absolutely committed with transparency. If in general, every cent, every peso must be put in the air, let's say.
Reported.
Yes. Mm-hmm. If it is, as in Mexico, money of the people, much more. Then we have, at least the party, we have decided to create a specific area of transparency. Now, with the new legislation, we must have it, but we have created it.
This is on private donations? On your private donations?
No, related
or on how you spend public resources?
To the whole amount. Obviously, if it's public money, the reasons are rotund, are clear. And now, the system, the accountability system, has been developed very, very deeply. I can affirm that if some branch of the law in general has increased the prescriptions, is the electoral branch of law. It's impressive how many laws there are related to the electoral issue. It's obviously only for specialists. It's really, really difficult. But
Here too.
But we are absolutely committed with this because it is the transparency. I think that it's a value that belongs to democracy. Then, if we need to be close to the population, to the citizenship, we need to be absolutely transparent, not only related to incomes, but to the applying of these resources that are mainly, as I told you, from the budget.
Right. I know you have to go out to the Hill. Can we do a couple of rounds of questions from the audience, which I'm happy to take? Questions? Somebody will come around with a mic.
And if you could say who you are.
Thank you.
Are you a journalist?
Yes, I am. But she's leaving. She's leaving. That's why I'm taking advantage of that. And you were talking, Ms. Wasserman. My name is Armando Guzman. I'm with Univision and TV Azteca, both. You were talking about voting rights in the United States, and I wonder, what kind of an effect do you think that the decision, the recent decision in Wisconsin by Judge Lynn Adelman will have on suppressing or ending all these laws that are impeding many people from voting around the United States? That was a recent decision, but mainly are trying to eliminate a problem that, according to the judge, does not exist.
All right, I'm going to take a couple of questions all at the same time.
Please, I'm just not familiar with that judge's decision. So what was it surrounding? Was it a photo ID? It was the photo ID legislation? Okay, I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you. My name is Jeanine Nguyen with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. I'm a nonprofit. I'm not the VOA. So thank you, the Honorable Camacho and Congresswoman Wasserman. My question has to do with the people that you're serving, because I believe both parties, the Democratic parties and your party from Mexico, have presented that you focus most on the people. And so my question has to do with the job situations. Mexico is a partner of the TPP, and Vietnam is also a partner of the TPP. So I'm asking what you think about the NAFTA, the minimum wage, the union labor laws situation that we're trying to present a level playing field in the US, and how does that tie in with our immigration laws in Congress, Congresswoman?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take one more question. Gentleman there.
Yes, hello. This is a question for Dr. Camacho.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Huh?
Your name, please.
My name is Björn Arp from Aparicio Arp & Associates, a local firm here in the field of human rights and international law. My question is for Dr. Camacho. You said that your party is very concerned about the empowerment of women and the presence of women. What comments would you have in regard to the fact that there's a situation in Mexico of one of the leading members of your party who's currently sequestrating, withholding 3 children that he had with a French lady, and who's now living in France, and where he's intensely doing all sorts of steps in order to hold these children back in Mexico and separating them from the mother. I'm referring to Mr. Arturo Montiel. Don't you think that the party he's representing should have any position in regard to this?
Great.
Thank you.
So why don't we take those 3 questions, the issue of voting rights, photo ID, how does our international trade agreements affect wage issues across borders, and then there's a specific question about Mr. Montiel.
Sure. On the photo ID question, and that's something that the Democratic Party has been extremely, extremely active in Our Voting Rights Institute has quarterbacked a lot of the both legal action and political action against photo ID requirements that, as you referenced, are essentially a solution in search of a problem. What Republicans in more than 40 states have done is used the flimsy excuse of ballot fraud, which even under George W. Bush's administration, and I sat on the Judiciary Committee during that time, showed that less than 2% of the ballots cast had any question mark hanging over them related to fraud. It was not an overwhelming problem that required a solution that essentially disproportionately impacts women and minorities. And I'll give you just an example related to how requiring a photo ID affects so many women in the United States, me being one of them. Many women in the United States have a photo ID that would be considered valid for utilization to cast a ballot that has a different name on it than their voter registration. My voter registration is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. My driver's license uses my legal name. If my casting a ballot in my polling place were enforced the way Florida law really requires it, other than that the poll workers know who I am when I walk into my ballot box, then I would be required to cast a provisional ballot. And if I didn't verify with the proper ID matching my voter registration, within 2 days, I wouldn't be able to cast a ballot. Minorities, particularly African Americans and Hispanic Americans, very often, 25% of African Americans do not carry a state-issued photo ID that is considered valid. And to add insult to injury, in almost every state in the country, you have to pay a fee to get these photo IDs. So essentially, that's like a poll tax. I mean, if we are requiring you to pay for identification that you must use in order to cast your ballot, that is moving us backwards and making it harder for people to cast a ballot. When we have the ability for electronic signatures, my state requires an electronic signature at the polling place. We have the technology to be able to verify that you are who you say you are and that you are the registered voter. And so all these laws are designed to do is to shrink the electorate, make it less likely that voters and it's very transparent, less likely that voters who are more likely to go to the polls and vote for Democrats can get there and reduce the size of the electorate to, unfortunately, make it more likely that Republican candidates have a chance to win because, from my perspective, they aren't able to win these elections on the merits.
Thank you. It's very important for us to emphasize that the last measures are related to social justice. After 20 years of NAFTA, we are absolutely convinced that the government at that time made a very, very good decision. But as in the life in general, every day this flows. Then we are absolutely convinced that the whole agenda of reforms, must increase the income of the people in general, but specifically to the people who needs much more. I would like to underline the important energy reform, that it isn't only an economic reform. It's a nationalist, necessary, and social reform. And I have some figures that I would like to share with you. The whole agenda of reforms can increase the Mexican GDP by 2 points additional per year by 2018. This is the reason why we are urged to pass the reforms, but after the new law, we need, as I told you some minutes ago, we need to become in policies and in actions and results, because I am sure that the people don't measure, the politicians because of the law. They are radical. They evaluate if they live better or not. Right. Then, related to the second question, I support every law, treatment, or any measure, legal measure related to protection of the people that in prima facie are not very well protected. Minorities, women, children. Then when I have been in Congress, in the Senate, and in the chamber, I have done, for example, or I have contributed to the to passing a really new legal system about criminal, for example, about criminal law. By the way, with the help of USAID some years ago. But in this specific case, I think that we politicians or not, must respect every singular and personal situation. We must, and I trust in the tribunals of Mexico or France or anywhere, because this is a particular matter.
Did you want to say something about the NAFTA and the idea of
what I wanted to mention is, she mentioned the minimum wage, immigration, right, and NAFTA. NAFTA, I would say, the best way for me to summarize, I was not in Congress when NAFTA passed, but the best way for me to summarize our point of view is that NAFTA has had quite a few good outcomes for the United States and the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and several that, let's say, could leave some room for improvement, to say the least. On the minimum wage, I think the party's differences here in the United States is very clear. That the Democratic Party is for an increase in the minimum wage. No one who works full-time should have to be on government assistance, and far too many of our minimum wage earners are in that situation, and we should increase the minimum wage to $10.10, which more than 70% of the American people agree with. And then I already talked about our position in favor of comprehensive immigration reform, backed up with action, as opposed to a smattering of Republican members who say that they want to move comprehensive immigration reform, but it's pretty clear that politically there isn't the wherewithal to do that.
I want to take the moderator's prerogative of asking sort of the last question, which is the future of political parties in the electronic age. I mean, newspapers are being ravaged, advertisers are being ravaged, the communications is fast changing very traditional institutions, and political parties are traditional institutions. And so the question is, do political parties have a future in the age of Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram? And do we really still need an ideological gathering place? Can't we all gather at home? I'll let you go first.
Well, I'm proud to say that over the last decade, the Democratic Party was ahead of the curve, far ahead of the curve. In fact, we pioneered and innovated, beginning with probably Howard Dean's chairmanship, through President Obama's two election cycles as a presidential candidate, the idea that yes, you do need a gathering place. You need, each candidate, I think, needs a core set of values, principles, and an agenda around which to organize. And that's what the National Party provides. Our focus at the Democratic Party is on allowing for our commitment to expanding access to the ballot, to use technology. And we just launched Project Ivy, our fourth generation of our digital and technological programs. We were light years ahead and remain light years ahead of the Republicans in that regard, and intend to continue to innovate, where we can micro-target minority groups and specific demographic groups to, in a very precision-like way, go down to the block and figure out, through the data that we've developed as well as the technology, how we're going to what is the best way to get that person to go to the polls and cast a ballot for our candidates. And the Republicans have recently recognized that that was something that they needed to try to catch up on. So we're very committed to the next generation of development of those tools. And what those tools do, we've embraced technology so affirmatively because it actually it underscores our commitment to inclusion. The more technology we have, because what we recognize is that the most important and precious resource that an individual has is not their money, it's their time. And for me, as a busy working mom trying to juggle 3 kids and these two full-time jobs that I have as a member of Congress and the chair of our national party, I know that, for example, when my daughter's elementary school PTA, the Parent-Teacher Association, calls me and asks me to write them a check for the bake sale, or to staff the bake sale table in the cafeteria, the check is easier than finding the time to staff the bake sale table. Same with if we need our volunteers to come down and do phone calls for GOTV. But now we have a tool, a dashboard tool, that allows them to do those calls with our lists and report back to us on their results from their kitchen table, from anywhere that they are, from their car if they're on a road trip, and have their cell phone with them. And that's enabled far more inclusion. It's enabled us to deploy a massive grassroots network of neighborhood organizers and precinct workers and team leaders. And so as a result, that's why we've been able to really, just to give you an example of the difference, in Ohio, the Saturday before the election, I remember the Romney campaign sent out a press release about how they had knocked on about 75,000 doors in Ohio that Saturday before the election. And we didn't brag about the fact that we had knocked on 300,000 that same day. So to say that there's a slight difference in the ability for us to reach voters and embrace technology in order to include more people would probably be a little bit of an understatement.
Dr. Camacho, the role of political parties in the future?
Politics can't go on without these kind of tools. I think that nowadays the digital world is a kind of new agora where we can discuss easily, when we can be close to many people that physically is absolutely far. We have created in our last assembly in March of last year a new organism that is called Movement PRI.mx that has been very successful because it is not only for the people who belong to PRI, but to the people in general that in many times pushes a very, very hard discussions about the public issues in general and specifically about our party. And this is linked to that decision that we have made, that is to open widely these doors to the youth, because they are mainly the users of this new way, the new instrument to the politics.
Thank you very much. Two leaders of two great parties, thank you very much for joining us today.